Paper money is worth almost nothing by itself, and yet paper conquered the world, not gold, not silver, not something rare, heavy, and difficult to debase. Paper, and then, eventually, numbers on a screen. So, here is the question that matters. If gold was harder, scarcer, and more difficult to manipulate, why did the world still choose paper promises? Why did governments move away from money they could not simply print? Why did banks embrace a system where credit could expand faster than metal? And why, whenever trust in those promises starts to crack, does the world suddenly remember gold again? Because this is not just a story about money, it is a story about power, debt, trust, convenience, and the price the world paid for choosing promises over metal. In this episode, we are going to answer three things. First, how paper money began, and why, at the beginning, it was not really money in its own right, but a claim on gold people already trusted. Second, why governments and banks fell in love with paper, not because it was more honest than gold, but because it was more useful for debt, war, expansion, and economic scale. And third, who won from that shift, who paid the price, and how this choice reshaped the entire modern monetary system. Because the real story of paper money is not the story of a clever financial invention. It is the story of how the world gradually agreed to live on promises. Paper money did not begin as independent wealth. It began as a promise to deliver something people already trusted. In early modern Europe, goldsmiths and private custodians stored customers' gold and issued receipts in return. At first, those receipts were simple claims, proof that metal existed somewhere else, but over time people began passing the receipts themselves from hand to hand. That was the turning point. Paper did not become powerful because it created trust from nothing. It became powerful because it borrowed trust from gold. This is the hidden origin of modern money. The paper note did not defeat gold at the start. It lived on gold's reputation. It survived because people believed that, if needed, the paper could still be turned back into something harder. That is what made it acceptable, and that is what made it dangerous. Then the private promise became institutional. In 1694, the Bank of England was founded. Its early notes were, in essence, promises to pay. Over time, these notes became more standardized, more official, and more widely accepted. Then law stepped in. In the early 18th century, promissory notes gained formal legal recognition. That mattered more than it sounds, because once a note is not only trusted privately but backed legally, it stops being just a personal promise. It becomes part of the system. This is the moment when paper money moves from convenience to infrastructure, from private claim to official money. And once that happens, trust begins to shift. Not fully away from gold, not yet, but steadily away from metal as substance and toward institutions as the thing people rely on. So why did paper spread so quickly? Because it was extraordinarily convenient. It was lighter than metal, easier to transport, easier to count, easier to store, easier to move across expanding trade networks, and far easier to use inside a growing banking system. But convenience was only the first advantage. Paper also made credit scale much faster. Metal is heavy and finite. Paper can travel more easily, circulate more widely, and support a much larger credit structure. That mattered enormously for commerce, for industry, and for states trying to grow faster than their metal base would allow. And here the deeper truth appears. Gold disciplines money. Paper liberates money. That is the real pivot. A gold-based system forces limits. A paper-based system allows expansion. For trade and production, that looked like progress. For power, it looked even better. States do not always prefer the most honest money. They prefer money that gives them room to move. Wars are expensive, crises are expensive, empires are expensive, welfare states are expensive, and all of these are easier to finance in a system where the money supply can expand. This is why paper was so attractive to governments. It gave them flexibility, freedom to spend, freedom to borrow, freedom to postpone hard adjustment, freedom from the harsh discipline of metal. The same logic made paper attractive to banks. If money remains tightly tied to gold, Expansion is constrained by reserves. If money becomes paper and credit, the system can grow much faster. That means paper money did not win because it was stronger than gold in some moral sense. It won because it was more useful to states, banks, and debt-based growth. That is what made it irresistible. But the world did not let go of gold overnight. After World War II, a compromise emerged. Under the Bretton Woods system, currencies were fixed to the US dollar, and the dollar itself was fixed to gold at $35 an ounce. This was the last great bargain between hard money and flexible money. The world was willing to live on paper. As long as somewhere underneath it, gold still stood behind the promise. That gave the post-war system credibility, but it also planted the seed of its own breakdown. Because once the world depends on paper expansion and rising dollar claims, a simple tension appears. What happens if there are more promises than there is gold to redeem them? That question would eventually become impossible to ignore. By the late 1960s, the pressure was building. The United States was running persistent deficits. More dollars were circulating globally, and confidence in the ability to convert those dollars into gold was getting weaker. Then came the turning point. In August 1971, President Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility into gold. This was not a minor technical adjustment. It was the moment the modern world openly accepted that money would now rest not on metal, but on trust in governments, central banks, and the broader system itself. And by 1973, major currencies had largely shifted to floating exchange rates. The old order was gone. From that point forward, money was no longer openly anchored to gold. It was anchored to confidence. And confidence, unlike metal, can expand, shrink, panic, and break. So who benefited from this shift? First, governments. Paper and fiat systems made it far easier to finance deficits, wars, stimulus, and rising obligations. That flexibility became one of the great hidden powers of the modern state. Second, banks and financial institutions. In a world of paper, deposits, and credit, balance sheets can expand far faster than physical gold reserves. The financial system becomes deeper, larger, and more influential. Third, borrowers. Inflation and easier credit reduce the real burden of existing debts over time. That gives a structural advantage to large debtors, especially sovereign debtors. And the scale of the system today tells the story. By the end of 2025, global debt had risen to a record $348 trillion. Government debt alone reached roughly $106.7 trillion. That is not the monetary world of gold discipline. That is the monetary world of paper flexibility. But if some players gained power, someone had to absorb the cost. The quiet losers were savers, creditors, people living on fixed incomes, people who believed money was a way to store labor safely through time. Because in a paper system, purchasing power can be eroded gradually, not always through dramatic collapse, often through something slower, quieter, and politically easier to tolerate: inflation. That is one of the hidden taxes of fiat money, not a tax announced in a speech, a tax that arrives through the shrinking real value of deposits, pensions, wages, and bonds. This is why gold keeps returning whenever confidence weakens. Not because gold is perfect, but because many people still see it as something harder to politically dilute than paper promises. And that is also why central banks never fully abandoned it. This is the great irony. The world built a paper system, then a credit system, then a digital system, then a debt-saturated system. But gold never fully disappeared. It left the center of daily circulation, but it remained in the basement of the system, as reserve, as insurance, as memory. Even today, official institutions continue to hold large quantities of gold, not as everyday money, not as a full monetary standard, but as the final backup layer of confidence. Paper won, but even the winners never fully dared to live without the old anchor somewhere nearby. So what really happened? The world did not move from gold to paper because paper was more honest. It moved from gold to paper because paper was more useful to states, banks, debt, and expansion. That choice gave humanity more scale, more flexibility, more growth, and more financial power. But it also gave the world inflation, fragility, political discretion, and a monetary order that depends much more heavily on trust. That is why gold never disappeared. It was removed from the center of the system, but it was never thrown away. It was kept close, just in case promises one day became too many. And that leaves the next question. If paper money borrowed trust from gold, then what will the next monetary system borrow trust from?